I'm going to title this video, Why the Comics Journal Was One of the Greatest Magazines Ever, or something to that effect. And this video will be about why I think that. Shown here are a bunch of my Comics Journal issues from the late 70s into the 80s and early 90s. And we'll just take a look at them, and I'll explain why I think so highly of the magazine. So we'll take a look at one of my older ones here. Now, a lot of my older ones are in rough condition. I'm going to move these out of the way. Let's stack this up over here. This one, as you can see, is kind of falling apart. This actually, I don't think, is my oldest one. This is issue number 42. I don't think this is my oldest one. This is from October 1978, it says. You notice, by the way, it has a UFO symbol on the thing. At this time, the Comics Journal was a member of the United Fanzine Organization, the UFO, a co-op that I'm actually a member of currently. I've been a member of since 2009 with my own fanzine, Dickomania. But at this point, the Comics Journal was sort of a prozine, is what they call them. You know, was sort of more than just a fanzine. It was, more of a professional type magazine. This by Gary Groth was the editor with Kim Thompson. In fact, there's the credits right there, the staff. But anyways, it was a magazine that actually had started as the Nostalgia Journal. And then it became the Comics Journal issue number 31, which I think was around 1977. And I think I have an older issue of this. I just couldn't find it at the moment. There's a bit of a yellow tint here that you'll see on the camera that isn't actually on the pages. It's just for some reason the lighting is doing that. I don't know why. If that makes any sort of difference. Not sure. Anyway, so at this point, it was sort of like, the Comic Reader fanzine would have similar information about upcoming comics. As you can see, it's DC, Marvel, and then there was alternative publishers. And then you had industry information. And there's various things like, what do the pros think about the Comics Guild, which was being proposed, sort of a union for freelancers. You see a quote there from Steve Ditko. I haven't seen any statements of principles, so I don't really know what it's about. It's really too ill-defined to talk about at this stage. So there's an comment from Steve Ditko and many other pros talking about it. And there was a transcript of a guild meeting, which Ditko was also at. Somewhere in here there might be a comment by Ditko, but you can see it's in transcript form. And so it's sort of like a recording maybe that was transcribed. Now, that is one of the reasons I love the Comics Journal, was they would have interviews that were transcribed like that, so warts and all. And then you have a letter page, which would be long letter pages, and they'd be controversial. Here's one from Roy Thomas, and I haven't read this offhand, but I assume he's complaining about something that the Comics Journal wrote, and about how they're, glorified fans and they don't understand what's going on. That's usually sort of the response that a lot of pros would have towards the Comics Journal. And then you'd have these long reviews of various things. Here's a review by Cat Ironwood, and so on. So now, if you're not a fan of comic books, obviously this is of little interest to you. But even for people who aren't fans of comic books, I think this is a sort of a model of why something like this is one of the greatest magazines of all time, because they had so much information of in their transcribed interviews and in their letter columns that made them relevant and made them vital to the industry that they were covering. So we'll take a look at another example here, another early example. This has a Marv Wolfman interview. Now the funny thing is they would sort of use this, like this looks like something that comic book fans in 1979 or 1978 would be interested in, covering mainstream comics, but it's sort of a Trojan horse in a way, because the magazine is really aiming towards people who at this point are kind of fed up with the mainstream, really disillusioned with the mainstream, really more interested in other things that are going on, foreign material, undergrounds, and things like that, and finding out that a lot of the comic behind the scenes, how the sausage is made is not that cool. So then there's another Roy Thomas letter in this one. Roy Thomas on Stan Lee. And you would it wouldn't be so sanitized or anything like that. Obviously if you read a magazine, Roy Thomas talking about Stan Lee and something else, you might have a more sanitized view. But here you were sort of getting the adult view, the unvarnished view of things. This was a comic for adults. Now the interview with Marv Wolfman is kind of funny because it's conducted by Kim Thompson, and it's basically, if I remember right, Marv Wolfman, who was an editor and writer at Marvel at the time, working on Tomb of Dracula, complaining about a review that had appeared in a previous issue of the Comics Journal. So he's talking with Kim Thompson, and there was something about Spider-Woman too. Like he was like, you don't understand the, background of why this character was created, blah, blah, blah. You made assumptions. Fans are always making assumptions in these reviews. He didn't like that. So the whole thing about here, and then he's sort of bad-mouthing some characters. And of course, they make that the highlight, the little sidebar. I remember he had one quote in here where he was like, Don McGregor was one of my friends until I became his boss. So he kind of it's kind of, you get sort of embarrassing comments, sort of the gossipy stuff. So you can see why some people would have a sort of negative view of the Comics Journal, feel like it's muckraking, it's, focusing on the negative rather than the positive. But on the other hand, it was sort of refreshing to be able to get past the hype, past the spin, past the publisher's way of presenting things, where everything's all rosy. Whereas here you were getting, how many pages is this actually? That's one of the things about these interviews. It's a transcribed interview. So count, this is page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, about 14 pages, because 2 of those were like half pages. So about 14 pages of Marv Wolfman in very tiny type. It kind of reminds me of like when Rolling Stone did the John Lennon interview, Lennon Remembers. I think they did that over like 3 issues or something like that, and then released it as a book. But it was sort of Lennon, tearing apart the Beatles myth and sort of bad mouthing some people. And so you felt like you were getting the real scoop on what was going on, the real dirt. And at length. Whereas nowadays, if you get an issue of Rolling Stone, it's very slick, it's very glossy. There's not going to be a huge amount of content. You're not going to get a transcript that's run pages and pages of someone talking, because that they're probably not going to say anything that interesting. They're not going to dish about people and stuff like that. Or long reviews where they're sort of really taking something on, or letter pages. When you get a Rolling Stone or any magazine now, except for fanzines, any mainstream magazine, they're not going to have pages and pages of letters or big long paragraphs, like we saw with those Roy Thomas letters. They don't, and of course there's a lot of history in here too, things that were important. Here's an interesting thing showing some page breakdowns. A rough produced by Ed Hannigan for a page in an upcoming Captain America story. The finished page is drawn by Sal Buscema. And that page is actually I recognize it's from Captain America number 237, which was a great issue. So it's interesting. Ed Hannigan must have laid it out, and then Sal Buscema penciled it, which I don't think is reflected maybe in the credits, the printed credits. Anyway, so again, more letter pages. Sometimes you would have, these would be like fan illos, but sometimes some of the people that drew these fan art later went pro. But anyways, it would be awesome if you had magazines now that had big opinion pieces that were really long, really required a lot of reading. Nowadays it's like people wouldn't have time for it. You do have, some long form journalism in certain magazines like The Atlantic. You can go to the website of some of these magazines like The Atlantic and so on, and they'll have, Variety and all that, and they'll have long articles and stuff. But to give you an example, I remember reading an interview with Camille Paglia years ago, and the thing that bugged me about the article was it wasn't written in transcript form. The writer says that he had an interview with Camille Paglia, this writer, feminist, sort of anti-feminist writer, feminist critic, and it was a 4-hour interview at a restaurant, and she talks really fast. But the article, that would have been awesome if it had been in transcript form, like with a like the Comics Journal does or did. But if it was all like this, where it was like, here's all the things, page after page of it, but what she's saying. But instead, what they had was the writer, and you find this in a lot of so-called interviews, the writer writes an article setting it up for the reader about who this person is. A lot of this, if you already know who the person is like a waste of time. And then there's a call for higher criticism by Paul Levitz. Again, a sort of fan turned pro now complaining about the sort of the way that fans are writing about stuff. But you wouldn't have something like this. Here's an interview with Chris Claremont. And with that Camille Paglia thing, it was like, let's talk about Camille Paglia's career. The writer's talking about it. We'll have quotes from old articles and stuff like that. And then interspersed would be new comments from that 4-hour restaurant interview. And you felt like, I could have, gotten this out. I didn't get anything new. I just got very little bit of new stuff. Whereas with the Comics Journal, you know, you were getting all, just page after page of, people talking that you wanted to read what they had to say. So again, let's see how long this Chris Claremont interview is. So this is the introduction. It starts here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Is that the end? Yeah, 17 pages of Chris Claremont in October of, let's see what year this is, probably 1980 or so. Let's see, 1979. So October 1979, it's 17 pages of Chris Claremont talking, uninterrupted, So anyways, we're not going to look at all these because we don't have time. But that is one of the reasons, basically, that, the Comics Journal was one of the all-time great magazines. Now, the thing is, around this time, I was only a kid, so I was not really the audience for the Comics Journal. It was more for older readers. If you were in your 20s and you were sort of hadn't outgrown comics, but you felt like you were about to, then this was sort of a way to keep you informed. Oh, this is interesting. It says Comics World, but this is an ad for Comics World, but actually, when this came out, it was actually renamed Comic Scene. Now, around this time, the last issue of Comic Scene, I think, was issue number 11 or so. In fact, I think I have it over here. In fact, let's see here. Here we go. Here's the first issue of Comic Scene. So when it came out, it was actually renamed. But let's see. Grab one of these here. Now, when this Comic Scene came out in, I think, 1983, September 83, this was more my thing. This was covering, all sorts of stuff, but it was kid-friendly. I bought this at the store. Not this particular copy, but this was a later upgrade. And I also bought an issue of the Comics Journal at this time. But I wasn't ready for it because it was like just too adult for me. Like I felt disturbed by it, So I wasn't really ready. And I no longer have a copy of that. And it was like part 2 of a huge interview with Cerebus creator Dave Sim. But later on, by the time, I was like 18 years old, I started getting Comics Journal. And by this point, you're kind of fed up with Marvel and DC. Then it's like, oh, this is a lot cooler. Now, they would still have, at this point, in the 1980s, they would still have Marvel and DC stuff as sort of a selling point on the covers. But because they were so controversial, and they were sort of airing everybody's dirty laundry in print, Marvel sort of stopped communicating with the Comics Journal, at least under Jim Shooter's reign as editor-in-chief. But, obviously, Marvel would still have, stuff on the covers here, because it was related to the people they were interviewing. But anyway, so here's a later issue. And again, you have long reviews, long letter pages. And then here's a long interview with Bill Sienkiewicz with, of course, lots of examples of his artwork. Now, here, some of my Comics Journals from this period are really tattered. This one was issue number 116 from like 1987, I think. July 87. It's falling apart, as you can see. I didn't buy it. When I bought it, it was brand new. It was pristine. But this one was awesome because it was about Watchmen. In fact, I think this cover was created by Dave Gibbons specifically for this issue, which shows like the first page of Alan Moore's script and so on. And it has a lot of stuff about Watchmen. And of course, other industry news. And I was like circling things I thought was interesting. Really became a fan of the magazine. Here's the Watchmen part. And this has like a panel convention that they were on. And so was that Neil Gaiman with them? Yeah, Neil Gaiman as the host of the moderator. And then Alan Moore interview. And again, it's going to be a long Alan Moore interview. And the Dave Gibbons interview. So this is sort of, was essential reading of at the time. Now this is an upgrade. My original is like totally falling apart. I think I probably threw it away. This one was awesome because it came out December 1987. This was the perfect time for me. I was in my senior year of high school, and Gary Groth was attacking some of the freelancers who had started a newsletter. There's various news bits here about there was a whole big thing about the ratings. The rating system that was being proposed by DC at that time. You have stuff about foreign magazines, a letter from Jack Kirby in the letter page, and I think there's also a letter in here of, oh, it must be another issue. There was one that was like sort of not a death threat, but it was sort of like a threat sent to Gary Groth, and sort of printed on the page. And here was the thing about the rating system. Big long interview with Alan Moore. At this point, Alan Moore was like the coolest comics writer around. Let's see how many pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.5. 9.5 page interview with Alan Moore, all very tiny type. Then you have a Frank Miller interview on the same subject about the ratings systems. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Run 9 pages again. So you have like 18 pages of them talking about the rating system. Then you have the Mobius interview. Goes on and on and on. So that was, that to me is a model. If magazines really wanted to be relevant to people, they would, instead of limiting the amount of text, they would have as much text as possible. This is another falling apart issue. Hernandez Brothers interview. Bill Watterson of Calvin and Hobbes. And this was the first issue of my subscription. By this point, May 1989, when I was 18 years old, I get a subscription. But as you can see, it's all falling apart. Second issue was this one, huge interview with Dave Sim. And by this time, I was ready for the Dave Sim interview. I had bought a few issues of Cerebus, and, this whole big thing was, it was a massive issue. How many pages is this? 144 pages, but it feels like more than that. Tons of news. And then let's get to the Dave Sim interview here. Look, here's the letter page. You have a letter from Burke Breathitt of Bloom County. Trina Robbins. Here's that one I was talking about, sort of like a death threat. Or something like that. A menacing letter. Although maybe it's a joke, I don't know. Ad for Ed Brubaker. All right. Finally, we get to the Dave Sim interview. This is like Lennon Remembers, you know, July 1989. And this was about a whole big thing that was playing out in the pages of Cerebus's text pages, where it was like the distributors weren't going to carry Cerebus, or they couldn't drop Cerebus because it was so popular, but they were not going to carry the Puma Blues, which Dave was also publishing through his comics publishing company. And so they were holding them hostage, as he saw it, because he wasn't allowing them to sell his phone book reprints. It was a whole big long thing. So let's say how many pages: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44. 44 pages of going on and on and on. And it's awesome, you know, especially if you're into this topic. Can you imagine if, like, say, Rolling Stone today would have, like, a 44-page interview with Taylor Swift? She's bound to say something interesting at some point, don't you think? Would make lots of headlines. But, of course, they don't do that. Or any magazine, you know, if Newsweek magazine said, yeah, we're going to have a 44-page interview with the Speaker of the House or whatever, you know, or any magazine like that, National Review or whatever, if they were going to have every issue would have a long interview like that, I think it would make more compelling reading, but they don't. I don't know why. Anyway, so we're not going to look at all the rest of these, but at least not too quickly, I hope. This one is, again, falling apart. These things were read to death, you know, like really absorbed at a impressionable time of my life, you know, when I was just out of high school and wondering what to do with my life. This was a good one about creators' rights, interview with Steve Bissett and Scott McCloud, talking with Gary Groth. Again, a big, long interview on similar to the Dave Sim thing. But we're not going to look at all that. An Alan Moore interview. This was another massive interview. And I think this was like part 1 of a 3-part interview, something like that. But again, this was sort of a must-read. Actually, the Alan Moore thing starts here. How many pages? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 38. To be continued next issue. 38 pages of Alan Moore going off and off and off. So, whew. But unfortunately, I missed the next parts. My subscription lapsed. I didn't renew for some reason. Maybe I just didn't have the money at the time. And these were a few others that I bought back then. And the most recent issue of Comics Journal that I have is this one from 2004. It's very thick, with Ed Brubaker interview. It's on better paper, but at this point, it was not as mainstream oriented. This is very much, indie oriented. Again, still long, big, huge interviews. It's this Ed Brubaker interview, again, it's really, really long. But on the other hand, it kind of makes you, you realize, gee, I don't know how many people would want to read, a 30-page Ed Brubaker interview, or however long that one lasts. Now, you may be wondering, You know, is there anything like this today? Because the Comics Journal stopped making print magazines, but there is Comic Book Creator, published by Tomorrow's. This is a semi-recent issue. It came out last year. And has a big long Steve Bissette interview in here. And again, they use the transcription form. Lots of stuff. So if you're a fan of the old-time Comics Journal, it's not going to be muckrakey like the old Comics Journal was, but it's going to have those in-depth interviews. So Comic Book Creator is still doing it. Look how long the Steve Bissette interview is. Pretty amazing, eh? This is exactly what I was talking about, what magazines should be doing today. Look how long this interview is. I haven't even counted the pages, but it's pretty long. And it's still going. I think that's it. All right, how many pages was that? Well, we're not going to count them all. We don't have enough time. But anyways, I recommend checking out Comic Book Creator. Sort of the heir to Comics Journal, maybe, in a way. I wish more magazines were like both of them. Anyway, thanks for watching.